do you
Yeah.
think in 2050 that FBS football will be separate from the NCAA, or do you think what do you think is going to happen in 2050?
In 2050, oh, brother, I'll be glad if I'm alive in 2050. I don't think FBS football as we know it exists in 2030.
Now it's the big one, the big boogeyman, and we've heard this a lot more in the coming future here. I've seen this. I wasn't really talking about this like 12 months ago, and now
Yeah.
this word, the scary boogeyman, is coming up. Private equity. What is private equity, and how could it potentially impact college sports, specifically football? How would they be involved? What does that kind of look like?
Yeah. When we talk about private equity, we talk about venture capital, we talk about we call institutional investors are these groups that have enormous amounts of money and capital. And they will often invest this in a variety of businesses in exchange for some control over how the business operates. They hope that the money gives the business the liquidity and capital to grow very quickly. And then that PE, that investment company, then wants to flip that equity, right? And it's usually not at, you know, 5, 6%, 10%, or even 2x. These entities are generally looking to throw in a bunch of money and then make a bunch of money back. 10x, 50x, 100x, right? To flip things. And part of the concern is that for many of these institutions, once they kick that money in and they get some control over the enterprise, they realize that the best way to maximize that investment is to not to grow the company, but to strip it for parts. And part of the reason you see me and maybe some of my colleagues raising this alarm the most right now is because one of the industries that has been most obliterated by takeovers from private equity firms has been newspapers, major metropolitan newspapers where people have come in, they've bought an equity stake, they fired 60% of the staff, they shut down some bureaus, the paper's still profitable, but then the guys leave and everyone's out of work and the paper sucks. Or it might happen with, a Toys R Us kind of place, right? You come in, you buy a profitable brand, you load it up with debt, you strip it for parts, you leave, store closes. So part of the risk of one of these entities becoming involved in like a college conference or an athletic department is they might decide, okay, we're going to kick in 600 million bucks. Why the hell are we sponsoring college baseball? Why the hell are we giving so many benefits to athletes when the most efficient way to capture the money is to raise ticket prices, cancel half of our vendor agreements, lay off 40% of the staff, throw the money around real estate development around the stadium, make it look like the Carolina Panthers, and get the hell out. And that's great for people that have their money tied up in BlackRock. That might be terrible for consumers, might be terrible for athletes or people participating in the industry. It might also be great because if we're looking at this period of enormous change, let's say you're Texas Tech, let's say you're Pitt or something, and you have to start paying athletes and you have to change into this new model. Well, maybe one of these investors comes in and gives you enough capital that you can then begin to absorb those costs without having to do mass layoffs. And then, try to run your department a little bit more like a profitable business. College sports is in this weird world where it's clearly on paper a business, like they care about maximizing revenue, but it's also not really run like a business. It's a nonprofit. They're not trying to show a profit. They're trying to do other, goals and to show to the public that they're not, capturing a 60% margin because there's no investors to return that money to.
Mhm.
Maybe in a more corporatized world that changes. I look at it as very risky, but I'm a professional journalist. So I know lots of examples of PE coming in and screwing everything up with institutions I care about. Not just newspapers, but also private, the private home market and some other industries. But I can understand how somebody else might feel differently about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I heard the example here. The private equity looks for really, really popular brands that aren't ran very well. And that's kind of
Yep.
what they kind of look for in this instance. Like you said, unfortunately, when they look at that, they're probably going to look at, let's just take a big university. You look at University of Southern California. They are netting a profit off football. They're netting a profit off of, well, technically based on how they do the books, off of
Yeah.
basketball.
Maybe, maybe not. Yeah.
But then like water polo, they're going to be like, oh, well, we already know what we're going to do here. Come in here and cut all the non-revenue sports, maximize revenue sports. But like you said, though, I think you mentioned here the world of massive change coming up. This is kind of a bonus question I got here for you. What's the next big movement here? Is it Florida State leaving the ACC? What do we have coming up? Do you think it's going to happen next?
Well, yeah, there's a couple of seismic things. And I'm not trying to evade the question, but there's a bunch that could kind of happen all around the same time. The Florida State legal situation with the ACC is definitely a huge story to monitor. If Florida State is able to negotiate that exit package down to under $200 million, right now it's give or take $500 million between buying out of the GOR and the actual exit fees, and that's part of the lawsuit. If they win that lawsuit or they negotiate elsewhere and it gets knocked down to under 200, Florida State could probably borrow that money from banks, and they'll be out immediately. And if that happens, North Carolina will do the same thing in 3 days, and Miami and Clemson and potentially other institutions will do that too. And then there's basically no ACC because nobody else can hope to bring anywhere close to that amount of value. You are now the gentrified American Athletic Conference, and everybody has some major challenges there. It's also interesting because, like, I have it on pretty good authority. It's not really a done deal that either the Big Ten or the SEC would take Florida State. It's not that they're not a great brand, but there's a lot of operational challenges to getting bigger than 18. There's some political issues with Florida State University that might make it dicey for the Big Ten. And hey, if we're moving to an explicitly professional model in 3 or 4 years, there might not be a Big Ten. There might not be an SEC. There might just be the Champions Collegiate Classic of 52 teams that all sell their television rights jointly, like the NFL does, and have one joint commissioner. And it doesn't matter what league you join because there's just one thing. That's a real possibility. So the stakes could be higher for both Florida State or the ACC. If the ACC wins, they might be able to head this thing off for 4 or 5 years, give themselves some more flexibility. That's worth paying attention to. It's worth monitoring. Johnson v. NCAA. Whatever the outcome is almost certain to be appealed, but that case should be decided sometime this year. You have additional National Labor Relations Board meetings, both with whether USC athletes should be employees or Dartmouth men's basketball on the complete other side of the country, other financial scope. Those will be appealed, but that will also signal to the NCAA, can we keep fighting this, or do we have to fold now? So those are 3 massive things. There's a few smaller ones that I think are relevant to my world, like about how ticket pricing is working in the future. But if you're from the outside, like those are 3, potential fissures for college sports as we know it.
Do you think, and a quick one before we get on to our EA college football question here, do you think in 2050 that FBS football will be separate from the NCAA? Or do you think, what do you think is going to happen in 2050?
In 2050, brother, I'll be glad if I'm alive in 2050. I don't think FBS football as we know it exists in 2030.
Wow.
We could have I would expect very significant structural changes well before anyone's current television contract ends. In 2050, there's no way, I can't imagine anyway, FBS football or the NCAA as we know it existing. I think the question is more like, what does this look like in 2028? Does the Big Ten still exist? Is there a separation of FBS football or of high-end FBS football from that, but we still have the vestiges of the college athletic system, or have we abandoned all of that? And Ohio State Buckeyes Football LLC just licensed everything from Ohio State and runs a professionalized outfit. Those changes, I think, are coming much, much quicker than 2050. Wow.
That's crazy. All right, guys, thank you so much for being here. Remember, please like, share, comment, subscribe, do all that stuff. I really appreciate it. That's it for me, guys. I'll see you guys later. I am out.